I recently read an essay written by Karl Marx called On the Jewish Question, which was a reply to Bruno Mars' essay called The Jewish Question. So I thought it's a very important text to understand. So before understanding the text, let's start with who was Bauer and where was he coming from, and why did Marx even bother to write about 20 pages of essay replying to the to Bruno Bauer, right? So first of all, it's important to understand what is the Jewish question. What is the history of it? Where did the term arise from? Right? Arouse, whatever. So it was these debates which were happening all across Europe during the 18th and the 19th century about the position of the Jew, the status of the Jew in the society, the position of the Jew in the society, how should the state treat them, should the state grant them the rights they are asking for, should the state grant them the social, political capital they are asking for, they're demanding for. So, should the Western society assimilate them? Then, what would be the role of the Jews in the society, in the future society, so on and so forth. The term Jewish question was first used in Great Britain after passing the Jewish Naturalization Act in 1753. The pattern is, quite similar to our present day society as well. Whenever there is a scheme giving rights, giving dignity for the marginalized groups, minority groups, whether it be religion, identity, whatever, the society, the majority starts questioning about the legitimacy of the group, start questioning about the status, or should or the minority groups deserve the rights that they are getting. So these are the questions which normally arise, right? In my opinion, the question itself has a very segregationist notion to it. The very idea of the insert any marginalized group here question sounds like a very bigoted question to ask, right? Moreover, that the question itself, which are being asked, and the solutions which are coming from, like especially in Bruno versus case, are all coming from a majority groups experiences, right? They're not understanding what is the plight of the Jews. So we see that in Bruno Mars's essay as well. He starts with questioning what the Jews mean when they ask for emancipation under the Prussian state. He says no one in Germany is emancipated, even the Christian Germans. These Jews are egoists if they don't ask for the emancipation of the collective, emancipation of the mankind. So if you ask me, I would say it's a very lazy and a very dishonest way to counter the argument. But we'll move forward, we'll try to understand where he is coming from, what his solutions are, what his questions are. So he goes on to question what even is emancipation for the Jews. If they ask for the same status that is same as another Christian subject is asking from the Christian state, then they recognize that the regime is of general oppression. Then why would the Christians need to care for the emancipation of the Jew if the Jews don't have any care for the emancipation of the Christian subjects, asking for the same status as Jews? One point to be noted is that Bruno Mars uses the Christian state and the Prussian state in a very interchangeable manner. Why? Because the Prussian state was following the laws and values of Christianity. That's why it's called Christian state. Why should they, the Jews, disapprove of their special yoke if they approve of the general yoke? Why should the German be interested in the liberation of the Jew if the Jew is not interested in the liberation of the German? The Christian state knows only privileges. In this state, the Jew has the privilege of being a Jew. As a Jew, he has rights which the Christians do not have. Why should he want rights which he does not have, but which the Christians enjoy? In wanting to be emancipated from the Christian state, the Jew is demanding that the Christian state should give up its religious prejudice. Does he, the Jew, give up his religious prejudice? Has he the right to demand someone else should renounce his religion? So, after all these arguments, he concludes by saying another quote, By its very nature, the Christian state is incapable of emancipating the Jew, but by his very nature, the Jew cannot be emancipated. So long as the state is Christian and the Jew is Jewish, the one is as incapable of granting emancipation as the other is of receiving it. He says the Christian state can only behave towards the Jew as a Christian state, that is, by granting privileges, by permitting the separation of the Jew from the other subjects, by making him feel the pressure of all the other separate spheres of society, and feel it all the more intensely because he is in religious opposition to the dominant religion. So that's what he says. He continues, but that also applies to the Jews as well. They would treat the Christian state as something alien to them by counterposing his imaginary nationality to the real nationality, by counterposing his illusory law to the real law, by deeming himself justified in separating himself from mankind, by abstaining on principle from taking part in the historical movement, by putting his trust in a future which has nothing in common with the future of mankind in general, and by seeing himself as a member of the Jewish people and the Jewish people as a chosen people. I think that's a very significant leap to make, right? It's a significant leap in arguments, and he jumps into various conclusions. His arguments shift responsibility onto the oppressed, so effectively making emancipation conditional upon the minority abandoning its identity, right? So, as if the problem of not emancipated earlier is a problem of the minority group itself. So his whole idea is as long as Jews aren't ready to sacrifice their identity of being a Jew, then they can never expect emancipation from the Christian state. And as long as Christian state isn't ready to give up its Christian values, Christian identity, then no religious minority group can expect emancipation from such a state. So that's his whole point. But if you see, he will be asking for, I think we'll see that in the further parts. So these various questions on the Jewishness, right? So this was his the Jewish questions. Now he will give answers, the solutions for these questions, and I think it's a very important part in the essay, in the whole thing, because this is where you can actually understand where Bruno Bauer is coming from, where his questions are coming from. He says, quote, "We must emancipate ourselves before we can emancipate others." End quote. To summarize everything he says after this, he says the only and the most rigid opposition that exists in between the Jew and the Christian is the religious opposition. So how can we make this religious opposition impossible? By abolishing religion, he says. So honestly, he sounds like, neo-atheists of our time. Like, yeah, minority religious groups are being discriminated against, and there is a systemic oppression that acts against them and keeps them marginalized, right? So what is the solution of all this? They say abolish religion. Does that make any sense? Like, yeah, philosophically it's understandable to have an opposition to the idea of God. In fact, I am an atheist. And also the position of the religion in the present day, the interference that it does with the politics and the abuse of religion in society are all a problem, yes. But it makes no sense to argue for abolishing religion when we are talking about the emancipation of the minority religious groups. That's an argument against the material realities of such minority groups, and at the least it's being unempathetic towards them, right? Anyway, in the next few lines we can see Bruno Mars' views on religion. He says that the religion is just the stages of development of human mind, different skins cast off throughout our history. So for him it makes sense to cast off the skin of religion now, and what he means by cast off skin is abolishing it. And then there would be no relation of Christian or Jew, no religion as such, but only critical, scientific, and human relation. He says, quote, "Science then constitutes their unity, but contradictions in science are resolved by science itself." End quote. So according to Bauer, the Jewish question doesn't have any significance just in Prussian state, but it's a question that has a universal significance. So it is not just a question about the Jews, the relation of the Jews with the state, but it's a question to be asked about the relation between the religion and the state, not just in Prussia, but all over the world. The contradiction between the religious constraints and political emancipation is a question of those. So, emancipation from religion is laid down as a condition both to the Jews who wants to be emancipated and to the state which is to effect emancipation and is itself to be emancipated from the religion. So, on the next few parts, Marx talks about the contradiction that we see in Bauer's argument. Bauer is arguing on one hand that the Jew should be emancipated not because he is a Jew but he is a citizen. The Jew will retreat behind the citizen and be a citizen although he is a Jew. That is to say, that the Jew will have two spheres, one being the political sphere that is as a citizen, and the other is his individual sphere where he is a Jew. But in the end, his Jewish and restricted nature will win over his political obligations. He says, quote, "The prejudice remains in spite of being outstripped by general principle. But if it remains, then on the contrary, it outstrips everything else." So who says this? This quote is from Bauer. So in that sense, if the Jew would remain a Jew, then that would triumph over the life of the Jew. In that sense, if the Jew would remain a Jew, then that would triumph over the life of the state. That is to say, his life in the state would only be a semblance or only a temporary exception to the essential and the rule. Continuing what Marx is saying, but on the other hand, Bauer talks about the task of the state. He says, France, for example, though has legally provided the universal freedom, but due to religious privileges, the society is still divided. So, due to this lack of freedom, the life, as always, reacts on the law, which leads to the law being used as a tool for division of the citizen into oppressors and oppressed. Bruno says, quote, "The Jew, for example, would have ceased to be a Jew if he did not allow himself to be prevented by his laws from fulfilling his duty to the state and his fellow citizen. That is, for example, if on the Sabbath he attended the Chamber of Deputies and took part in the official proceedings, every religious privilege and therefore also the monopoly of the privileged church would have been abolished altogether. And if some or many persons or even the overwhelming majority still believed themselves bound to fulfill religious duties, this fulfillment ought to be left to them as a purely private matter. There is no longer any religion when there is no longer any privileged religion. Take from religion its exclusive power and it will no longer exist." Of course, the religion notion affords security to the state, but to what state? To what kind of state? End quote. So, this is what Baba answers. The whole point being abolishing the religion politically is the solution, but he also says that being religious is a private matter. Then he also argues that even if a small speck of religion exists, then emancipation is impossible. Says religion triumphs over political obligations. Does that only apply to the Jews or to the people of every religion? Is my question. Because it seems like when he's talking about, let's say, Jewish religion, he'll be very critical of religion. But whenever he talks, let's say, about Christianity, which is his own religion, he will say that it provides security to the state, right? All his criticism flies out of the window. He argues like as if Christians aren't more religious than Jews. Anyway, then he moves to say it's not the individual who does it, but the state which abolishes the religion, and also says the religion notion affords security to the state. That's a lot of contradiction to deal with. Marx here writes something I feel is very sharp and as a criticism. Quote, Bauer therefore demands on the one hand the Jews should renounce Judaism and the mankind in general should renounce religion in order to achieve civic emancipation. And on the other hand, he quite consistently regards the political abolition of religion as the abolition of religion as such. The state which presupposes religion is not yet a true real state. The problem with Bauer, I think it's getting dark. I think this is okay. Yes. The problem with Bauer is that he convolutes the concept of political emancipation and general human emancipation. So, this is what Marx says. So, the right question to ask is not who is to emancipate, who is to be emancipated, but it would be what kind of emancipation is in question. What conditions follow from the very nature of the emancipation that is demanded? The absence of this understanding of his is quite visible when he writes against the opponents of Jewish emancipation. So Bauer says, quote, their error was only that they assumed the Christian state to be the only true and did not subject it to the same criticism that they applied to Judaism. That's what he says. But the problem here is that he moves forward to criticize the Christian state but not the state itself. While talking about the political emancipation, it becomes very critical question to understand the relation of the political emancipation to the human emancipation and the state. Marx adds, quote, if Bauer asks the Jew, have you from your standpoint the right to want political emancipation? We ask the converse question. Does the standpoint of political emancipation give the right to demand from the Jew the abolition of his religion and from the man the abolition of religion? So, I assume everything makes sense till now. Bauer puts the problem of giving rights to the minority on the shoulders of the minority. In simple words, he does victim blaming. But more than another fund, but more than that, another fundamental and a very important to point to keep in mind is the difference between the political emancipation, let's say a marginalized group, and human emancipation in general. How the system weaponizes, tying it to the present day affairs, the misguided form of political emancipation of a marginalized group to distract people from asking critical questions like what does everybody mean by political emancipation and relation of political emancipation and human emancipation. um, we can see this whenever people ask for human emancipation, people will just say, well, you have been politically emancipated, why do you want human emancipation? We'll we'll discuss about that more deeply with examples going forward. So, understanding this might help us to solve and take a stand on the issues we face today. Helps us to understand the liberal politics and socialist politics in general. Before moving forward, I wanted to say some things. This text has been highly controversial due to Marx saying some things that some people consider as anti Semitic, subscribing to the idea of Jews being capitalistic and money oriented, right? And also, some people disagree with that, saying that his problem was with religion itself, not Judaism. He talks about other religion in the same tone as he was with class politics, and some other people add to that saying even if he was anti Semitic, it's not surprising because considering the time period where Marx lived, existed, the anti Semitic ideas that people held might be why he was bigoted. But discussing that is not the aim of this video. If you want that video, comment down below. I'll make another video on that about my opinions on the topic. The point of this video is to analyze what the conceptual and theoretical frameworks he builds on his arguments and brings that to politics of our time. Okay. The point of this video is to analyze what the conceptual and theoretical frameworks that he builds his argument on and to bring those arguments to present day context. We were at discussing difference in political emancipation and human emancipation. So in my opinion, this is a great argument to make, which also quite present to our times. Political emancipation can be brought by establishing a state which will presuppose the religion, such as secular states. But even if we establish such state, it's not going to guarantee the human emancipation of the marginalized groups. How? Marx gives an example. Quote, "It follows, finally, that man, even if he proclaims himself an atheist through the medium of the state, that is, if he proclaims the state to be atheist, still remains in the grip of religion, precisely because he acknowledges himself only by a roundabout route, only through an intermediary. Religion is precisely the recognition of man in a roundabout way, through an intermediary. The state is the intermediary between man and man's freedom, just as Christ is the intermediary to whom man transfers the burden of all his divinity, all his religious constraint. So the state is the intermediary to whom Marx transfers all his non divinity and all his human constraints. No, human unconstrained. So what does he mean? So what he means is whether it be religion or the state in a man's world, both are just the vessels for the person to transfer his burdens, his identities or paths into it, transferring divinity and religious constraints to religion and non-divinity human constraints to state. That is the nature of political emancipation. That also means that in a secular state like North American states, what Marx uses as example, though the people are religious, the state can exist as secular but not without any influence of religion. The person who finds himself religious is the same person who is also the citizen. While arguing for this, he takes the example of the abolition of private property. He says, is not private property abolished in idea if the non property owner has become the legislator for the property owner? The property qualification for the suffrage is the last political form of giving recognition to private property. Nevertheless, the political annulment of private property not only fails to abolish private property but even presupposes it. The state abolishes in its own way distinctions of birth, social rank, education, occupation when it declares that birth, social rank, education, occupation are non political distinctions. When it proclaims, without regard to these distinctions, that every member of the nation is an equal participant in national sovereignty, when it treats all elements of the real life of the nation from the standpoint of the state. Nevertheless, the state allows private property, education, occupation to act in their way, that is, as private property, as education, as occupation, and to exert the influence of their special nature. Far from abolishing these real distinctions, the state only exists on the presupposition of their existence. It feels itself to be a political state and asserts its universality only in opposition to these elements of its being. That clears a lot of things, right? Just with these paragraphs, we can apply the same concept to various other things, but we'll try to understand it a bit more with reference to the Jewish question. We'll understand it a bit more. Then we'll move on to the question of identity, the way the religion will exist going forward, and all these things. Even with the political abolition of private property, the private property in its social sense isn't going to disappear. Similarly, political emancipation works by abstracting from real differences rather than abolishing them. The state declares individuals equal, free, and secular, but this equality exists only within the political sphere. In everyday life, distinctions like property, religion, and social identity continues to shape human existence. Thus, the state becomes a mediator. It represents freedom in an abstract form while leaving its material conditions untouched. The people constantly live in this contradiction of whether there is equality or not. So that's why we see, even with the rights to the marginalized groups, even with representation of minority groups, the inequality persists or even thrives in some society, while the state constantly yells that the said discrimination has disappeared, has rooted out. To compile everything that's been said, depending on the kind of emancipation, it can be called into two types: human emancipation and political emancipation. Due to the nature of political emancipation, it abolishes the existing privileges in the previous societies and creates conditions to bring a state to power which would presuppose all the social entities, in this case, religion. But it does not make effort to change the material conditions leading to said inequalities. That leads to a state which presupposes religion, property, or identity. That is, it gives political emancipation, but inequalities haven't disappeared. The Jews aren't emancipated. The marginalized aren't emancipated. Why is this way? Why wouldn't the liberal democracies or capitalist societies don't bother to care about the human emancipation? Why would people move forward from asking political emancipation to human emancipation when political emancipation have already been achieved? Why doesn't that happen? Why does it only stop at political emancipation and sometimes it reverts back to losing the political emancipation, right? And note, it always happens in liberal democracies, in capitalist societies. Why is it that way? So it's because the political emancipation is compatible with the type of economic system that the liberal democracies establish. That is, it's compatible with capitalist economies. But human emancipation is not. What is human emancipation? It's about changing the substructure, which is dictating and making the superstructure of the society. That is, politics, culture, art, whatever it is, right? So then what is the substructure? That is the economy, the human relations that exists in the society. Liberal societies don't pursue human emancipation because doing so would completely change the the discriminatory human relations, the oppressive human relation that it is based on, right? They're built on. Changing this relation would lead to total human emancipation and also total change of economic systems. So we'll talk with an example. After the 2008 economic crisis, the American state subsidized and also waived the loans of many American banks to kickstart the economy. People were obviously pissed because this showed that how unequal American society was. The protests were called Occupy Wall Street. And yes, the state broke down on the protests. So the companies now leaned into liberal politics, as always the companies does when there is a populist leftist movement. So they adopted what we now refer to as rainbow capitalism. Pride and Black Lives Matter like protests erupted. One very important thing to understand here is that it's not like these movements are not important, not like these movements are bad or something. Political emancipation is the first step to take before asking for the total human emancipation. And human emancipation is a necessary condition for the state and for the society to check before it progresses to other developed forms, before it progresses forward. I mean, Marx also agrees on that. He says political emancipation is, of course, a big step forward. True, it is not the final form of human emancipation in general, but it is the final form of human emancipation within the hitherto existing world order. It goes without saying that we are speaking here of real practical emancipation. But what's more important to recognize is that how the power acts in these times, in tense times. And as leftists, I think we should be aware of that and constantly speak about the class politics and socialist vision. Pride movement and BLM are all important, yes, but is it the final form of human emancipation for, let's say, queer community or black communities or other oppressed groups, other minority groups? No. We should aim for the abolition of systemic inequalities, which exists, which is based on the human relation that exists in the substructure. So now for some similar protests in my country, in India. Anna Hazare's anti-corruption movement of 2011, there is no better example. Trust me. Baba Ramdev, Arvind Kejriwal of Aam Aadmi Party, and Anna Hazare were the figures which came out of this movement, which demanded for reforms in the state structure itself. against the said political corruption in the government. But it never aimed at changing the underlying substructure which leads to political corruption, like corporate relations, capitalism, and class structures. Yeah, that is the nature of liberal politics. The goal of the protest was not to transform the relation between the state and the capital, but to make that relation appear more transparent and accountable. Just as political emancipation abstracts from real inequalities, the anti corruption movement abstracted corruption from the conditions that produce it. 15 years after the protest, Anna Hazare disappeared, existing in people's amnesia from 2011 forever. Baba Ramdev opened a company which sells for COVID, medicines for COVID, not vaccines, medicines for COVID, and whatever his other shenanigans he does. And Kejriwal, he does good. That's all. And after that, after the 2011 protests, BJP came into power, and it has been it has never been more opaque government than the one that exists now. The corruption is hidden. It happens behind the closed doors. That's how it is. Now, before analyzing the identity politics, let's understand how religion exists in the society where everyone is emancipated. According to Marx, he says when the state presupposes religion, the religion wouldn't disappear because of its loss of privilege, as Bauer says. He says it would still exist as private issue for the people. But sometimes that would try to triumph over the citizen of the private person, making state an abstract entity. But in a society where human emancipation is achieved, religion would lose its social necessity, not necessarily vanish instantly. It would no longer function as a response to suffering or alienation, and would increasingly become a personal or a residual practice from the previous societies rather than a structuring force in society. That sounds scary for many liberal politics devoured brains, but think about it. Religion gives solace for the people who are hurt, who feel helpless. That's why there is state. That's why there is religion, where people see themselves from the standpoint, from see themselves through these vessels, right? That's why there is a need for religion to exist. But when people are given what they ask for, why would they still stick on to religion, right? They would circumvent around religion to find meaning in something else like art, science, something more material, something which is more real. So that's not state forcibly abolishing religion, but religion withering away because there are no conditions that would help religion to exist. Using this to construct a using this to construct a parallel to identity politics, identity is a personal matter to everyone, but it becomes political because of the discrimination that the social relations reproduce. The contradiction leads to one dominating other. But if there is no such contradiction, then that would inevitably lead to human emancipation. That is, identities shaped by oppression would lose their political necessity as the conditions that produce discrimination disappears. However, human differences would remain no longer as sites of domination but as non-hierarchical forms of social existence. Now, for the controversial part, if we apply that to Indian societies, which I am more familiar with, a big problem is caste, right? Over the years, my views on caste reservation have evolved. I'm at a point now where I believe that to achieve a casteless society, reservation is not the only way forward. In fact, I believe reservation is a must. Reservation should be even strengthened, but it's not the final destination. Reservation alone will not bring caste liberation, Dalit liberation. The that's a final that would be the final Dalit emancipation for liberals. But as someone who holds socialist views, socialist visions for society, it's important to talk about how change in human relations, like land reforms, Dalit representation in power positions, with that, abolition of private property. These concepts are more important for the upliftment of the underprivileged castes and the abolition of caste itself. More on that in different video. I think we should even more dive deeper uh, about annihilation of caste. Um, I think we should draw more parallels to other societies which had caste before and how it overcame. So that's a matter for that's a debate for different video. Now, before ending the video, I wanted to speak about something. I am no intellectual. I have started understanding Marx for a few months now. I would like you to point out any contradictions that I presented or anything that would have brought more clarity to the concept. I'm planning to read more books in the future and become more aware individual and make videos about it, sure. So keep it as critical as possible and constructive as possible. In my opinion, that brings more weight to the idea that you are conveying and also I am conveying. And also it also helps my idea to evolve. And also these videos are just like you know uh, a diary for me to understand how my idea has been evolving. So you can support me by subscribing to the channel and liking the video, and yeah, please do comment.